Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Would you take a job that pays 3 times your normal salary? Before you answer, let me tell you about 9 people who said yes. They traveled north, far north, into a place where the sun doesn't rise for months, where the wind screams like it remembers the names of the dead. They thought they were going to work. They were wrong. Something ancient lives in that endless dark, something hungry, and it waits for people desperate enough to say yes. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Scripture Horror brings you bone-chilling, true inspired stories every single day. Now turn off your lights, because what happened to the overnight staff at the Hearthlight Bakery in Nome, Alaska, will stay with you long after this video ends. My name is Celia Vargas, and I've been a pastry chef for over 15 years. I started out in a small family cafe in El Paso, Texas, rolling dough before sunrise, burning my hands on cheap ovens, learning patience one loaf at a time. Over the years, I worked my way through resorts, hotels, even a cruise ship galley, the kind of kitchens that never sleep. I thought I'd seen every kind of rush, every kind of hunger, but I'd never seen anything like Nome during the polar night. It began in early October of 2019. I'd just finished a miserable contract in Seattle when I saw the ad. Overnight baker needed, 4-month contract, double pay plus housing. Must be comfortable working in isolation. Location: Nome, Alaska. At first I laughed. Nome? The place famous for blizzards and gold rush ghosts, but the pay was real. The bakery's name, the Hearthlight, sounded warm, safe. And after years of scrubbing sugar off counters and sleeping in motel rooms, I needed a change. I signed the contract that night. The flight landed just before the final sunset of the year. By the time I reached town, the horizon was already bruised purple. The locals told me that once the light left, it wouldn't return for over 60 days. The Hearthlight Bakery stood on a quiet corner across from an empty playground. Its windows glowed a soft golden yellow, a beacon in the snowstorm. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me like a hug. Cinnamon, butter, coffee, everything familiar. Behind the counter, a woman with gray blonde hair and bright eyes smiled. "You must be Celia," she said. "I'm Marjorie, the day manager. You'll be our night baker. We stay open 24 hours during the dark season. The whole town lives by our bread." She gave me the tour. 3 industrial ovens, 2 heavy mixers, 1 walk-in cooler, and shelves lined with ingredients that gleamed faintly under the lights. "It gets strange at night," she warned as we walked past the prep tables. "Just follow the order slips, even the ones that don't make sense." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. The routine my shift ran from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights it was quiet, just me in the back and 2 front-of-house workers, Naomi and Trevor, college kids home for the winter. We served late-night nurses, cargo pilots, and oil field drivers. Everyone came for warmth, caffeine, and company. At first, the routine comforted me. I baked sourdough, cinnamon rolls, croissants. I listened to music, kneaded dough, and watched the snow build up against the windows. But by the 2nd week, the strange orders began. One night, Naomi walked in holding an order slip. "Hey, Celia," she said. "Someone called in a pickup for Reverie Loaf." I frowned. "Never heard of it. You sure they didn't mean rye?" She showed me the slip. The handwriting was old-fashioned, thin and spidery, written in fountain pen ink. "It came through the fax machine," she said. "We don't even use that thing." When I asked Marjorie the next morning, she smiled like I'd passed some invisible test. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You'll know how to make it when the time comes." The first phantom batch that night, I found ingredients on my counter I didn't remember taking out. Pale, silken flour that shimmered faintly blue, sugar that smelled faintly of rain, salt that glowed like frost under moonlight. I don't know what possessed me, but I started mixing. The ratio came to me as if whispered, 3 parts memory, 1 part longing, a pinch of sorrow. I kneaded until my arms trembled, and every press of my hands brought up faces from my past. My abuela's laugh, my first kitchen fire the day my mother died, when I slid the dough into the oven. The scent filled the entire bakery, a smell like warmth itself. When Naomi handed the finished loaf to the man who ordered it, he broke into tears before taking a bite. "It tastes like my wife's kitchen," he whispered. "She's been gone 20 years. He left without paying. When Naomi tried to chase him down, there were no footprints in the snow, orders from nowhere. After that, the slips kept appearing, some on the counter when no one was looking, others fluttering out of the receipt printer though no one had rung up a sale. Sorrow cakes, memory biscuits, winter hope muffins. Each time the ingredients seemed to appear on their own. Each time I somehow knew what to do, and each time the customers who came for them looked faded. Their faces pale, their eyes hollow, their clothes 30 years out of date. Trevor said one night, "You ever notice some of our customers don't leave footprints?" I told him to stop joking. But the next morning, when I went out back to dump the trash, I saw them. Gray silhouettes waiting quietly by the alley door. When I stepped closer, they stepped back into the shadows, leaving the faint smell of cold air and candle wax behind. That was the night I started locking the back door. The Phantom Bakery by December. The line between the living and dead customers had completely vanished. One moment I'd hand a latte to a paramedic. The next I'd be slicing remembrance loaf for a woman whose obituary hung on the community board since 1984. They always thanked me. Always politely, always with the same words. "You bake what we miss." I began baking through the morning, unable to stop. My ingredients no longer came from the supply truck. The flour felt lighter each day, the butter more fragrant, the sugar faintly glowing in the dark. I discovered that the pastries took on emotion. Solace cookies brought comfort. Morning buns helped the living cry. Dream bread gave people one last chance to remember who they'd lost. But it wasn't free. Every batch drained something from me. My laughter, my warmth, my sleep. The more I baked, the more I resembled my customers. Pale, hollow-eyed, slow to speak. Trevor quit after finding a handprint burned into a cooling tray. Naomi followed when she saw a little boy sitting on the floor, eating cookies that crumbled into ash in his hands. After that, I was alone. The visitor one night in late January. The cold was so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. I was finishing a batch of Eclipse tarts when I heard a knock on the back door. 3 slow taps. I opened it a crack. A woman stood there in a white coat dusted with snow, her hair long and wet. Her skin was pale as ice, but her eyes glowed faintly gold. "Thank you for feeding us," she said. Her voice echoed like wind through hollow walls. "You are the first in many years who can still taste what we taste." I asked who she was. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "We are the ones who never thawed," she said. "The winters kept us and the dark remembered our hunger. Your food gives us warmth again, but you cannot stop now. You're part of us." She handed me a folded piece of parchment and faded into the snow. The paper held a single line in that same thin handwriting. "Bake for those who remain unseen." That was when I realized the Hearthlight Bakery wasn't just a bakery. It was a bridge, and I was its keeper. The descent by February, I couldn't tell night from day anymore. The ovens roared with light even when I didn't turn them on. The radio played songs I hadn't heard since childhood, and sometimes when I looked through the bakery window, I saw the reflection of people standing beside me. People who weren't there. The living customers began to notice. They'd enter cheerful and leave silent, uneasy. "It's too quiet in here," one man whispered. "Feels like someone's breathing down my neck." The lights flickered constantly. The air smelled faintly of sugar and snow. I kept baking anyway. I made birthday cakes for children who never lived to see their next one. Wedding cookies for couples whose bodies were found frozen hand in hand. Communion loaves for fishermen lost at sea. Every night the alley filled with more of them. Silent figures waiting patiently for the warmth only my oven could give, and I gave it. Over and over. The return when my contract ended in April. Marjorie thanked me with a strange look. Part sorrow, part relief. "You did beautifully," she said. "We'll see you next season." I told her I wasn't coming back. She only smiled. Back in Texas, I tried to find other work, but every night I dreamed of the bakery, the smell of yeast, the faint tapping on the window, the whisper of names I didn't know. And every morning I'd wake with flour on my hands. By October, the pull was unbearable. I flew back to Alaska without telling anyone. When I walked into the hearth light, the ovens were already warm. The back door was unlocked, and waiting on the counter was an order slip written in that same elegant handwriting. "Welcome home. Celia, the night is hungry again. Now every winter, If you walk past the Hearthlight Bakery during the polar night, you'll see it. My name is Luis Ortega, and I've been working cleaning jobs for nearly 20 years. Started right after high school in Phoenix, pushing mops in grocery stores, scrubbing restrooms in office buildings, wiping fingerprints off glass doors that never stayed clean for more than an hour. Over the years, I climbed my way up, from small contracts to major properties. I've cleaned up blood in hospital ERs, scraped graffiti off bus terminals, and once spent an entire night unclogging a fountain full of feathers after some company's art party went wrong. I thought I'd seen every kind of mess the world could make. But that was before I took the winter contract at Aurora Plaza in Barrow, Alaska, a job that taught me what it really means to clean in the dark. Sometimes the night doesn't just cover things up, sometimes it brings them back. The job offer came through a temp agency that November. The ad was simple: overnight janitorial, full-time, high pay, immediate start. The hourly rate was double what I made in Arizona. The benefits included health insurance, something my 8-year-old daughter Sophia really needed. She was staying with my sister while I took the contract. I figured a few months of hard work in the Arctic would be worth it. Aurora Plaza wasn't a huge mall. One anchor store on each end, a food court in the middle, maybe 40 smaller shops in between. Clean, modern, with polished tile floors and skylights that stayed dark all winter. During the day, it looked ordinary. Kids hanging out, families running errands, the same kind of small-town mall energy you'd find anywhere in America. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I had the place to myself except for one security guard. Perfect hours, really. Barrow was in its polar night season. The sun wouldn't rise for over a month, so night felt like the only time that existed. My routine settled fast. I'd clock in, grab my cart from the janitor's closet, start on one side of the mall and move methodically through every section. Vacuuming carpets, mopping hard floors, emptying trash cans, polishing glass doors, sanitizing food court tables, cleaning restrooms, and finally doing a full lockup check. 8 hours to cover about 200,000 square feet. Easy enough if I stayed focused. The place felt heavier than anywhere I'd ever worked. The kind of silence that pressed against your ears. The heating system rattled inside through the ducts. My footsteps echoed in long, empty corridors, and sometimes the sound bounced back from the far end a beat too late, like something else was walking after me. Still, I told myself it was just the Arctic quiet. Then, about 3 weeks in, I noticed them. It was around 3:40 a.m., near a store called Pixel Point, one of those gaming shops filled with LED lights and screens. I caught movement behind the security gate. 3 teenagers playing on demo consoles, laughing softly, eyes glowing in the blue light. Behind the counter stood an employee ringing something up, except Pixel Point closed at 9 p.m. sharp. I'd watched the manager lock it myself. I walked closer and knocked on the gate. The kids looked up, smiled politely, and went right back to their games. The employee gave me a small nod like I wasn't interrupting anything unusual. I grabbed my radio. "Hey Marcus, you seeing this? There's people in Pixel Point." Marcus, the guard, replied without hesitation. "Yeah, night customers. Happens every winter. Some folks around here prefer shopping during the dark hours. Nothing to worry about." I'd been working nights most of my adult life. I'd never heard of stores reopening at 3 a.m. But Marcus sounded calm, so I shrugged it off and went back to work. Still, something about them unsettled me. When I looked back, the teenagers were moving differently, slower, like their bodies were floating a few seconds behind their intentions. The next night, the same thing happened. Not just at Pixel Point, but at other stores too. A woman browsing candles in the home decor shop. A man trying on boots at the outdoor gear store. People reading books in the little cafe near the center court. All of them polite, silent, except for the faint rustle of movement. All of them moving with that same eerie patience, as if time didn't matter. By 4 a.m., I counted at least 15 night customers across the mall. At first, I tried not to stare. When I needed to mop near them, they stepped aside without a word. When I emptied bins, they'd nod courteously. Not one of them spoke directly to me, but all behaved with uncanny respect, like they understood the rhythm of cleaning work. But I began noticing the details. At the registers, the screens were blank. No numbers, no prices, no receipts. The employees went through every motion of a sale, and the customers handed over money. Bills that looked damp, edges frayed. One dropped to the floor, and when I picked it up, the paper felt cold, as if it had just come out of a freezer. In the bookstore, I saw customers flipping through blank pages, white as snow, no ink, but they were reading, eyes scanning left to right, turning each page like the words were there. At the food court, I saw people eating, plates full, cups steaming, forks moving, but when I got close, there was no smell, no sound of chewing, no leftover crumbs when they left the tables. When I emptied the bins, they were spotless, as if the food had never existed. By the second month, I stopped reporting it. It had become part of the shift. Clean around the night customers, keep your head down. Don't disturb their shopping. That's when new stores began to appear. A shop called Echo & Sons, where people bought replicas of lost moments. Another named The Archive, selling photographs of strangers who looked like the customers themselves. A third with no name at all, filled with odd tools and metal contraptions that hummed faintly when I walked past. These places didn't exist during the day. I checked. Worse, my keys started opening doors that weren't supposed to exist. I'd find service corridors leading to new sections, rooms that weren't on the blueprints taped in the janitor's office. Sometimes I'd walk through a hallway and end up on a floor that shouldn't have fit within the mall's structure at all, like the building was expanding in directions impossible to measure. Cleaning those areas was different. My vacuum picked up invisible dust that returned seconds later. My mop water turned gray even when the tiles looked clean. Trash cans filled with paper that dissolved when I tried to empty them, and the customers began speaking to me. A woman asked, "Where's the counter for forgotten things?" A man said, "Which way to the corridor that only opens after 1?" I heard myself answering automatically. "Past the fountain that doesn't work, take the stairway that smells like pine cleaner, then left." They nodded and thanked me, walking away with that slow, dreamlike grace. And every time my directions were correct, and even though I didn't know how I knew, they started tipping me too. Coins that felt too heavy, bills that disintegrated when I took them outside. But inside the mall, they looked and felt real. Then one night, I caught my reflection in a store window. My skin was pale gray, eyes slightly sunken, movements slow and deliberate, just like theirs. I tried to take photos, but every image showed only empty corridors, my cleaning cart moving by itself, my mop gliding with no one pushing it. I could see everything clearly with my own eyes, the phantom customers, the impossible stores, but my phone saw nothing. That's when it clicked. The Aurora Plaza I worked in at night wasn't the same mall that existed during the day. It was a mirror version, inhabited by shoppers and workers who'd died during past winters, people who'd frozen in their cars, collapsed on icy roads, or never made it home during blizzards. They returned each polar night to keep doing what they did best, shopping, working, existing within routines they couldn't let go of. And they needed maintenance. One night, a man in a black uniform, who I'd never seen before, approached me in the food court. "We've been expecting someone like you," he said. "Someone who can clean both sides, the living mall and the other one. We can't keep the floors shining without help." That's how I realized I'd become their janitor. When my contract ended in March, I packed my bags and tried to leave. But when I reached the airport, I couldn't board. My chest tightened like I was forgetting something urgent. The closer I got to the plane, the heavier I felt, like gravity itself wanted me back at the mall. So I returned. The management, real or otherwise, gave me a permanent title, Facilities Coordinator for After-Hours Operations. No mention of ghosts, of course, but the pay tripled and the benefits were generous. I started receiving packages for Sophia, toys that glowed faintly and vanished when touched by daylight. She never questioned where they came from. Now every winter when the polar night returns, more customers appear. New stores unfold from nowhere. Sometimes a new cleaner joins the team and mentions seeing me working in corridors that don't exist on their maps. Those ones usually get transferred to day shifts before they figure it out. I don't mind. The work is steady. The pay is good, and someone has to keep both worlds clean. Sometimes when the nights get long across Alaska, mall security cameras catch glimpses of a gray janitor moving through locked stores, wiping counters that no one can see, pushing a mop bucket that glides without wheels. That's probably me, or one of my coworkers from the other side, because malls never really close. Not completely, and good customer service doesn't stop just because the customers are dead. Someone has to. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I've been driving school buses for 23 years. I started out in rural Idaho, taking mountain routes where kids lived miles from the nearest paved road. I've handled everything: whiteout blizzards, breakdowns, in sub-zero wind, even a moose crashing into my side mirror once. Parents trusted me with their most precious cargo, and I never let them down. Not once in over 2 decades. But what happened during my winter contract in Nuvik, Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about the simple job of getting children safely to school. Some routes aren't listed on any map. Some students don't appear on any enrollment sheet. And some schools only open their doors when the sun disappears completely. I should have paid attention to the warning signs, the pay that was double, my usual rate, the vague job description, the temporary contract that no one ever seemed to finish. It started in late November, when I accepted a position with the North Icefield Borough School District in Nuvik, a settlement near the Arctic Ocean. It's the northernmost inhabited community in the United States, barely 4,000 residents living above the Arctic Circle. The pay was excellent, and they needed a veteran driver who could handle brutal conditions. Nuvik enters its polar night around mid-November. For 67 straight days, the sun doesn't rise. Temperatures sink to 40 below, and the only light comes from porch bulbs, dim street lamps, and the shimmering auroras that ripple across the sky. My bus was a Bluebird Arctic model, fitted with engine heaters, reinforced glass, insulation thicker than my gloves, and GPS adapted for tundra travel. My assigned route, Route 7B, covered the outer neighborhoods, scattered clusters of homes half buried in snow. The district gave me a precise map, every pickup, every driveway, every child's name. The kids were tough as steel. 10 and 12-year-olds wrapped in expedition-grade parkas, rubber boots made for -60 weather, and hoods rimmed with reflective tape. They navigated in total darkness like they'd been born to it. The green trailer with the broken antenna meant the Tiglik stop. The yellow cabin with the tilted porch marked the Utuk twins' house. My routine was simple: start the engine at 6 a.m., begin pickups by 6:30, drop everyone at Alaskan Middle School by 7:30 sharp. Afternoon route began at 3, home by 4:15. Dispatch monitored all drivers by radio in case of whiteouts or sudden temperature drops. For the first month, everything went smoothly. The kids were respectful, their parents waved from doorways, and the school staff praised my punctuality. I felt good, useful even. It's rare to feel that kind of purpose behind a steering wheel. Then December 9th arrived. That's when the true darkness began. That morning I was finishing the last few stops on Frostline Road when I saw something that made no sense. A small figure stood beneath a flickering streetlight at the end of the road. A streetlight that, according to my district map, shouldn't exist. Frostline Road ended in open tundra, no homes, no power lines. The figure was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, dressed in a red parka so clean it almost glowed against the black snow. She waved as I slowed down. I opened the door and she stepped aboard with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Daniel," she said, perfectly polite. "I'm Hannah, thanks for picking me up." I checked my manifest, no Hannah listed anywhere. "Where do you live, sweetheart?" I asked. "Frostline Road," she answered without hesitation. "The gray house with the satellite dish." I frowned. The official route ended at number 10. Beyond that was nothing but ice and wind. Still, she looked every bit like a regular student. Proper boots, district standard backpack, even a homework binder stamped with the school logo. When I tried to radio dispatch to confirm, all I got was static. The GPS glitched, showing my location as area unknown. But the road beneath my tires was solid, and the streetlights burned steady behind me. "Copy, dispatch." "I've got an unscheduled pickup on Frostline," I said. The only reply was a burst of distorted voices, almost like children whispering. Then silence. So I took her. It seemed harmless enough. At Alaskan Middle, she thanked me and joined the other students going inside. Teachers waved at her, calling her by name like she belonged there. But when I checked the front office, the secretary blinked. "No Hannah enrolled here," she said flatly. "Maybe she's new. Just pick up whoever needs a ride. It's that kind of season." The next morning, Hannah was waiting again, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 more kids stood beside her, a boy and girl who looked like siblings bundled in identical navy coats. They introduced themselves as Caleb and Mira, giving an address on Snowfield Avenue that didn't exist in any district record. Within a week, my passenger count had jumped from 12 to 20. Phantom students, the other drivers called them, kids who only appeared when the sun vanished. They stood in places my GPS showed as empty. They carried school supplies that looked authentic, but when I tried to verify their names, none were listed in any enrollment file. They sat quietly, never misbehaving, never cold. Their breath didn't fog in the frigid air. One afternoon, Hannah turned to me and said, "You miss your daughter, don't you?" I almost hit the brakes. "How do you know that?" "My mom told me," she said softly. "She says we can keep you company until she forgives you." I didn't have a response for that. When I tried photographing them for documentation, the pictures came out wrong. Empty seats, faint depressions on the cushions, outlines that faded as I stared. Other drivers whispered similar stories. They called them winter families, residents who appear during polar night then vanish when the sun returns. Nobody filed reports. Nobody wanted to lose their job. Then the phantom children started asking for different schools. "Mr. Daniel," Hannah said one afternoon, "today I need to go to Calic Elementary." There was no such school in the district, but she gave directions so confidently that I followed. The road wound through snowdrifts and power lines until I saw it. A squat building under working lights, flagpole swaying in the wind, and a sign that clearly read Calic Elementary School. But according to every satellite image, that lot had been empty for a decade. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting more of these impossible schools: Nanook High, Tasik Middle, Polar View Primary, each with students, teachers, and full classrooms. They all thanked me for driving their routes. Yet when I checked the district database, not one existed. My mileage reports became nonsense. Fuel usage doubled. GPS logs overlapped in places that couldn't physically connect. And every time I radioed dispatch, the voices answering me sounded different, slower, older. By January, I noticed something else. My reflection in the bus mirrors looked pale and sluggish, as if moving through syrup. My eyes no longer caught the cabin light. Regular students started whispering. One boy asked, "Why do you talk to the empty seats, Mr. Daniel?" Parents called the school board to complain that I was ignoring their kids to chat with shadows. I was told to take a leave of absence. But the phantom route still needed a driver, and I could still see the children waiting in the dark. That's when Hannah explained everything. "We're from schools that closed," she said during one of our long morning drives. "When the government stopped funding the smaller villages, our teachers and friends went away. But we still have classes. We still want to learn." She looked at me with eyes that seemed lit from within. "We need someone to bring us there. Someone who can see both sides." That's when I understood. The phantom schools were real once. Tiny rural classrooms shuttered by budget cuts, abandoned when families moved south. Their students, unwilling to let go, kept attending through memory, through habit, through something deeper than either. And somehow I'd crossed over into their version of the district. By the time spring thaw came, I couldn't leave. I tried. Booked a flight back to Idaho, but every September when the days grew short, something pulled me north again. The real school district hired me permanently as special transport, but we all know what that means. Every polar night, new phantom children appear, waiting by flickering lamps on roads that don't exist. New substitute drivers occasionally glimpse me at dawn, steering a gray bus with no plates, stopping for kids who aren't there. Most of them get transferred before they start asking questions. I exist somewhere between the living routes and the lost ones, driving through both realities. My bus runs on something beyond diesel. My students live in the spaces between memory and need. Sometimes my daughter in Idaho gets strange mail, school photos with no return address. She told me once, "Dad, I can almost see you in them, but you look faded." Now every winter when the darkness falls across Alaska, the reports begin again. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I've been a registered nurse for 12 years. I started out at St. Luke's Trauma Center in Minneapolis. working my way up from new grad to night shift charge nurse. I've seen it all: gunshot wounds, hypothermic rescues, overdoses, cardiac arrests, and things the textbooks never warned us about. I thought nothing in medicine could surprise me anymore. But that changed during my 3-month contract in Barrow, Alaska, during the polar night, when I learned that death isn't always the end. Sometimes it lingers, waiting for someone like me to tend to it. I'd been feeling burned out back in Minnesota. Years of 12-hour shifts, short staffing, and too many patients coded on my watch. The hospital pay was steady, but student loans and rising rent made me feel like I was running in place. So when a travel nursing agency called about a night shift position at Arctic Bay Medical Center, paying 3 times my normal salary, I jumped at it. 3 months in the dark Arctic winter. How bad could it be? Arctic Bay Medical served about 4,000 residents in Barrow, and another few thousand in remote coastal villages. It was the only functioning hospital for hundreds of miles. During the polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for over 65 days, the hospital becomes the heartbeat of an entire frozen region. I was assigned to nights 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., which, given the 24-hour darkness, didn't make much difference. The facility was modern enough: telemetry monitors, a small ICU, decent lab equipment, and even a helipad for medevacs. The staff was polite, if a little reserved. They'd seen plenty of travel nurses come and go. Some lasted their whole contract. Others quit after a week. My first week was busy but routine: frostbite, alcohol-related hypothermia, snowmobile injuries, and the occasional respiratory infection. The day nurses warned me about something called polar night syndrome, a mix of insomnia, depression, and mild psychosis that affected both locals and outsiders. "People start seeing things that aren't there," said Tracy, the day shift charge nurse. Hearing voices, thinking the darkness is alive, I brushed it off. I'd worked nights for years. A little seasonal darkness couldn't scare me. That confidence lasted until my second week, when a medevac helicopter landed in the middle of a snowstorm. The patient was an elderly Inupiaq woman from a village called Silver Hollow. I couldn't find that name anywhere in the hospital system. No record, no insurance, no coordinates. Maybe it's a local nickname, the admitting clerk suggested. Some of those tiny villages use traditional names that don't match our database. The woman's lungs crackled with pneumonia. Her temperature was 86 degrees, deep hypothermia range, yet she was alert, even talkative. According to everything I knew, she should have been unconscious. I started her on IV antibiotics and warm fluids. When I tried to call her village for family notification, every radio frequency came back as static. The operator shrugged. "Happens all the time up here. Weather kills the signal." 2 nights later, another helicopter arrived. This time, a young man with a compound fracture from somewhere called Winter Creek, another village not found on any map. He had cash for his treatment, old bills, brittle and cold to the touch, leaving a metallic scent on my hands that no soap could remove. By week 3, I'd admitted patients from Pale Harbor, Lost Channel, and Frost Valley, 5 communities that supposedly existed but couldn't be located on any GPS or government map. The same pattern every time: real medical emergencies, cash payments, and villages no one could verify. Our pilots couldn't find the locations for return flights, so the patients stayed, occupying beds that didn't officially exist in our system. The strange cases escalated. The woman from Silver Hollow kept a stable blood pressure, yet her core temp dropped to 82 degrees, a temperature incompatible with life. The young man's frostbite moved. I'd document blackened fingertips, then check an hour later to find his hands normal, while the necrosis crept up his forearms. Lab results made no sense. Blood partially frozen but still circulating. Oxygen saturations that should cause brain death. Their vitals didn't belong to living people. They spoke English perfectly but often whispered in another language, something ancient and melodic that didn't match any native dialect I'd ever heard. When I asked about their homes, they described them vividly: schools, churches, stores, fishing docks. But when I searched the coordinates they gave, satellite images showed nothing but blank tundra. "My village has a red steeple," the old woman said proudly. "You can see it from the bay. Google Earth showed only ice and rock. Discharge planning became impossible. The pilots couldn't find landing zones that matched the patients' stories. So they remained unlisted in the hospital census, taking meals, using supplies, but leaving no record in our software. They ate constantly but never seemed satisfied, favoring raw meat and ice water. None of them ever slept. I'd walk past their rooms at 3 a.m., and they'd already be watching me, eyes open and unblinking. Then came the first conversation that shouldn't have happened. "You still talk to your sister in Chicago?" The young man from Winter Creek asked as I adjusted his IV. I froze. "How do you know I have a sister?" He smiled faintly. "She worries about you, especially after what happened with the fire." My throat closed. No one at Arctic Bay knew about the apartment fire that nearly killed me last year. I hadn't told anyone. "We see the things that linger in you," he said. "The same way you see us?" Another patient, an old fisherman, added, "Your father died when you were 16. You still blame yourself for not hearing him fall?" I dropped the medication tray. My father had fallen down the basement stairs one morning, something I'd buried deep. There was no way they could know. I began staying longer after shifts, monitoring them. Their conditions fluctuated wildly. Flat lines one moment, stable vitals the next. According to medicine, they should have been dead a dozen times over. Sometimes they talked to invisible visitors. "My wife's sitting right there," one man said, pointing at an empty chair. "She's telling me about our old cabin." He'd laugh, pause, nod, carrying full conversations with nothing. At first I assumed delirium. Then I began seeing movement, shadows shifting near their beds, faint silhouettes that vanished when I turned my head. The patient rooms felt crowded even when they appeared empty. Soon, my charts no longer matched the hospital's census. I was documenting care for double the number of patients listed in the system. Medications went missing. Fluids drained faster than expected. I began feeling strange symptoms myself. Chills that wouldn't fade, breath fogging even in warm rooms, skin paling to an unhealthy gray. My body temperature dropped to 93 degrees Fahrenheit, yet I felt fine. The worst part? I started hearing the invisible ones too. Whispers at the edge of hearing, soft requests for help, the beep of phantom monitors, distant coughs from rooms that were supposed to be empty. And my hands began to move on their own, checking non-existent pulses, hanging IV bags on invisible hooks, charting vital signs that I somehow knew. One night, the charge nurse found me talking to empty beds. "Lauren," she said carefully, "who are you speaking to?" I pointed. "They need suctioning." "Can't you see them?" She looked and saw nothing but rumpled sheets. "You need rest," she said gently. But behind her, I saw 3 shadowed figures, patients she couldn't perceive reaching toward me for help. I tried taking photos. Every image came out wrong. Just empty rooms with faint depressions in the bedding like someone had just stood up seconds before. During my 6th week, the truth came out, at least their version of it. The woman from Silver Hollow spoke first. "Our villages are gone," she said quietly. "Swept away by storms, sickness, and accidents long ago. But we still need care." The man from Winter Creek added, "During the long dark, the boundary between your world and ours fades. We come to the hospital because we remember pain. We remember needing help." Another voice, soft, female, spoke from the empty corner of the room. "You can see us, Lauren. You're halfway between both worlds now. You're the one who can heal what's already dead." I realized then that I had become their nurse, a bridge between the living and the lost. When my contract ended in February, I tried to leave. I packed my bags, printed my travel voucher, and even sat in the Small Barrow Airport terminal waiting for my flight. But as the snow howled outside, I felt it, the pull. By nightfall, I was walking back toward the hospital without remembering deciding to. My ID badge still worked. My scrubs still fit. My patients were waiting. Now, years later, I still work the night shift at Arctic Bay Medical. Officially, I'm not on payroll. My name isn't in the system. But the nurses who replace me each winter sometimes glimpse me in the hallways, charting vitals on invisible patients, speaking softly to the empty air. They usually get transferred to days after that. Administration pretends not to notice because somehow the hospital's satisfaction scores stay high, even though no one can figure out who's submitting the feedback forms. My temperature hovers around 88 degrees now, and my reflection looks less human every season. The pulse at my wrist beats slow and distant, but my hands are steady, my instincts sharp, and my patients, living or not, still need me. Every polar night, when the darkness swallows the horizon and the boundary between life and death thins, they return. The lost from Silver Hollow, the broken from Winter Creek, the forgotten from Frost Valley. And I'm here waiting, the night shift nurse who tends to the dead. My name is Ethan Ward, and for 8 years I worked as a maintenance engineer on the Northern Cross Pipeline, the massive system that moves crude oil from the Beaufort coast down through the Canadian Arctic to Port Waverley. 8 long years of keeping hundreds of miles of steel alive in weather that can kill you in minutes. I've repaired pumps in -60 winds, replaced valves during whiteouts, and kept oil flowing when everything else wanted to freeze solid. I thought I'd seen everything this frozen land could throw at me. I was wrong. The Northern Cross Pipeline isn't just another industrial project. It's a heated artery running through thousands of miles of permafrost. If it cools even slightly, the oil thickens into sludge and stops moving altogether. My post was Pump Station 5, about 90 miles north of Inuvik, one of the loneliest outposts in the Arctic. The nearest human settlement was 6 hours away by snowsled, if the weather didn't trap you first. The station itself was a cluster of squat metal buildings surrounded by towering pumps, generators and heater units that hummed day and night. My job during the polar night season was simple but relentless. Monitor temperatures, inspect pressure readings, test heaters twice a day, keep the systems alive while the world outside froze into silence. Officially, every station required 2 personnel, but after budget cuts, the company decided 1 technician was adequate. That technician was me. I didn't mind the solitude. The stillness grew comfortable over the years, until December 12, 2021, when something broke that calm forever. That morning, the temperature hovered around -45, which counted as mild. The pumps were steady, oil pressure perfect, and the generator output was normal. Then our subsurface radar started glitching. The radar system was a new addition, installed to monitor the permafrost beneath the pipeline as climate shifts made the ground unstable. The readings showed a void roughly 50 yards east of the main line, a hollow space where solid frozen ground should have been. A void that size could mean serious foundation failure. Protocol was clear: investigate immediately, take core samples, and report structural risk. So I loaded a portable drill rig onto the utility sled and drove out into the darkness. The light from the station faded behind me until it was nothing but a faint halo on the horizon. Out there in the deep Arctic night, the dark isn't just absence, it feels like a thing that presses against you. I set up the rig and started drilling. The first 15 feet came up normal. Ancient ice, frozen soil, layers of compacted silt. Then the bit suddenly dropped, jerking the rig so violently I nearly lost control. Warm air rushed up from the hole. Real warmth, maybe 50 degrees Fahrenheit, coming from deep beneath the ice. And then the smell hit. Not oil, not gas. Something sweet, organic, like fruit left to rot in a sealed room for centuries. Curiosity outweighed fear. I lowered a fiber optic camera into the opening. The feed flickered, then stabilized. What I saw didn't belong under the earth. It was a chamber, vast and symmetrical, carved out of ice like a cathedral. The walls weren't jagged or natural, they were smooth, almost grown that way. Under the LED light, I could see dark vein-like structures running through the translucent ice, pulsing faintly as if liquid moved through them. The fluid was black and thick, flowing in rhythmic patterns like blood through arteries. Then the camera panned across the floor, and I stopped breathing. Thousands of ovoid shapes arranged in precise geometric rows, each one about the size of a basketball, translucent and inside movement. Something twisting, pressing against the thin membrane walls. I pulled the camera up and tried the satellite radio. Dead. Tried the backup system. Dead too. Total isolation. I told myself it was a coincidence, electromagnetic interference maybe. But that night, as I logged the readings, I started hearing sounds from the direction of the drill site. Wet, sliding noises like something huge moving through sludge. I told myself it was the ice settling. But the pattern was too deliberate. Too alive. By midnight, I couldn't take it. I drove the sled back to the hole and found it had widened, at least 6 feet across now. The warm air was stronger, the smell unbearable. I sealed it with emergency concrete plates and reinforced it with steel brackets from the equipment shed. By dawn, the plates had been shoved aside from beneath. Whatever was down there was strong and getting closer. I watched from the station as the ground around the hole began to shift and crack. Then from the widening pit, something climbed out. The first creature. It was roughly humanoid, 8 feet tall, but wrong, every proportion twisted. Its skin was translucent, its muscles and organs visible beneath like dark shadows moving through jelly. The limbs were too long, with multiple joints bending forward and backward at once. It had no eyes, only a surface covered in twitching nodules that rippled constantly. And the sound, it sang. A mournful, high-pitched resonance like wails echoing under the ice. I hid inside the pump house, watching through the window as it touched the equipment. Wherever its hand rested, the steel frosted instantly, gauges dropping to impossible lows. Then more of them emerged. Half a dozen, maybe more. Each slightly different, yet moving as one mind. They seemed drawn to heat. They clustered around the heating coils, tracing the pipes with curiosity. That's when I understood they weren't here by accident. The pipeline's warmth had woken them. As the creatures explored, station power readings spiked erratically. Temperatures plummeted even with the heaters running full output. They weren't just cold, they were absorbing energy, pulling heat straight out of metal, air, and electricity itself. I tried starting the truck. The engine roared once, then died instantly as frost spread across the hood. One of the creatures pressed its face, if you could call it that, against the windshield, skin pulsating with slow movement. I ran back inside, barricading the control room. The security monitors flickered as the creatures dismantled the heating system with unnerving precision. They didn't smash. They disassembled, removing panels in perfect order, extending bone-like projections from their arms to use as tools. Every move was calculated. The temperature fell fast. I could see my breath fog inside the control room. My instruments showed pipeline pressure dropping toward zero as the crude began to freeze solid inside the pipes. At 3 a.m., I made one last call on the emergency line. For a few seconds, I reached Operations HQ and managed to say, "Station 5 compromised, total system loss," before static swallowed the signal. Then darkness. The lights winked out one by one as the creatures drained. The last of the electrical power. The final thing I remember is the glass of the control window, frosting over in delicate fractals, and the sound of that haunting, musical hum surrounding the building. When I woke up, it was daylight. I was in a hospital bed in Yellowknife. They told me rescue helicopters had arrived 20 hours after communications ceased. They found the entire pump station encased in ice, every system frozen and dead. I was discovered unconscious, body temperature at 82 degrees, with frostbite that made no medical sense, patterns shaped like branching veins across my chest and arms. The official company report blamed a catastrophic heating failure and abnormal weather phenomena. They claimed no evidence of subsurface anomalies existed, but the radar logs I'd uploaded earlier, those vanished from the database. Months later, thermal satellites began picking up something strange. A cold patch surrounding the old station site, nearly 50 degrees colder than the surrounding terrain. It hasn't changed since. I was reassigned to desk duty, then quietly retired. The company paid well for my silence. But every winter, reports keep coming in. Technicians describing heat drains, sudden pressure drops, and power systems failing without cause. Some even claim to hear that same humming before everything goes dark. The engineers say the permafrost is melting faster each year, but I know better. It isn't melting. It's being fed. Those things down there aren't gone, they're waiting. They've learned what warmth is and what it can do for them, and we've built them a perfect food source. Hundreds of miles of heated steel stretching across the Arctic. Sometimes, when the wind howls at night and the temperature drops too quickly, I still see the frost patterns creeping across my skin, and I wonder if we built the pipeline where they wanted us to. Because next time, when they rise again, I don't think they'll go back beneath the ice. My name is Sarah Callahan, and I've been working in the commercial fishing and seafood industry for nearly 10 years. I started right after high school in Astoria, Oregon, scraping scales and sorting shrimp at a small dockside plant. Over time, I worked my way up to quality assurance, eventually handling large-scale operations along the Pacific Northwest coast. I've seen it all. Broken equipment, spoiled shipments, near-fatal accidents, and storms that swallow entire trawlers. But nothing prepared me for what happened during the winter season of 2022, when I took a contract job in Kodiak, Alaska. That winter changed everything I thought I knew about the ocean. Some things that come out of it should never be touched, let alone eaten. I took the job at Blue Ridge Fisheries because I was desperate. My apartment lease was ending. I was behind on student loans, and the idea of triple pay for a few months of night shifts seemed too good to refuse. Everyone in the industry knew Kodiak's winter season paid top dollar because of how brutal it was. Most workers quit within a month, unable to handle the darkness, the cold, or the endless isolation. But I thought I could handle it. I'd worked long shifts before. I was wrong. The plant sat right at the edge of the harbor, a hulking slab of concrete and corrugated steel that looked more like a bunker than a fish factory. Inside, there were 3 long processing lines running 24 hours a day when the boats came in from the Bering. My shift was the graveyard one, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the hours when the world outside turned pitch black and the wind screamed against the walls hard enough to make the metal vibrate. Kodiak, during the polar night, doesn't feel like part of Earth. The sun vanishes for weeks, and the horizon becomes a permanent void. The ocean turns black, the air freezes in your lungs, and every sound seems amplified. Creaking pipes, distant foghorns, the groan of ice shifting under the docks. The only thing that kept me sane was the noise of the factory floor, the conveyor belts, the buzz of the filleting saws, the constant splash of seawater. My station was on processing line 3, where the incoming catch was sorted before freezing and packaging. Cod, salmon, halibut, and crab. I'd gotten good at identifying species at a glance, trained to spot disease, bruising, or anything that didn't belong. The work was mechanical, but the pay, $2,000 a week plus overtime, made it worthwhile. At least that's what I told myself during those endless nights. It started during my 3rd week. Fish began coming in that didn't look right. They were pale, almost colorless, and under the fluorescent lights, their scales shimmered faintly, like they were absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Their eyes were too large, bulbous, and glassy, and when I touched them, they felt oddly warm, even though they came straight from the holding freezers. I asked my shift supervisor, Earl, what species they were. He barely looked up from his clipboard. Deepwater cod variant, he said. You get weird ones this time of year. Just process them, but these weren't variants. The anatomy was wrong. Bones arranged strangely, gills in places gills shouldn't be, and fins that twitched long after the body was cut open. The boats that delivered them were even stranger. They always arrived between 3 and 4 a.m., their engines nearly silent as they glided into the harbor. The crews were bundled in old, mismatched gear and avoided eye contact. They never spoke, not even to the dock hands. They unloaded their cargo fast, paid in cash that was ice cold to the touch, and vanished into the Black Sea before anyone could question them. When we processed those fish, the machines started failing. Blades that stayed sharp for months dulled after cutting through a single batch. Motors overheated, sensors shorted out, and when we cleaned the equipment afterward, we found a slick residue coating the metal, a dark, metallic substance that shimmered under the lights but left permanent stains on stainless steel. Then came the noises. At first, I thought it was pressure in the pipes or vibration from the refrigeration units. But when I cut one of the glowing fish open for inspection, it made a sound, an actual sound. A low, haunting note that didn't come from air or movement but from deep within the flesh, like something alive was still in there. The pitch vibrated in my teeth, made my eyes water, and for a moment the entire line went silent as if everyone else had heard it too. The sound wasn't random. It was patterned, musical almost, like the way whales communicate. And when one fish made the noise, others on the line began to respond, harmonizing in tones that were just low enough to make the air tremble. I asked Nora, the woman who worked beside me, if she heard it too. She looked pale and said it was just the equipment, but her hands were shaking. After that night, I started keeping samples, tissue slices, and internal organs for later inspection. That's when things really stopped making sense. Inside these fish were foreign materials, bits of metal, glass shards, even fragments of what looked like electrical wiring. In one specimen, I found a rusted wristwatch, still ticking faintly though it had no battery. Another contained a small, perfectly round stone that was freezing cold no matter how long I held it. When I reported it, the plant manager brushed me off. Debris from wrecks, he said. Bottom feeders eat that stuff all the time. But when I suggested sending the samples to a lab, he got angry, told me Blue Ridge had exclusive research partners and that outside contact was forbidden. By early December, half our nightly shipments were these luminous, deformed fish. The phantom boats came daily now, always at the same hour, always in silence. The air inside the factory grew heavy, humid, and hot despite the refrigeration running full blast. I realized the strange fish were heating the building. Even dead, they were alive somehow, releasing warmth like small engines. Then the hallucinations started. Sometimes when I looked at the fish, their eyes would move, tracking me. Their mouths opened and closed slowly, forming shapes that looked disturbingly like words. Their vocalizations increased in intensity, echoing faintly in my ears long after my shift ended. I started wearing earplugs, but the vibrations still got through. I could feel them in my bones. I began to notice changes in myself too. My hands developed a dull grayish tint and my fingertips went numb. I could no longer feel the cold the way I used to. Some nights my body temperature spiked high enough that I could see steam rising from my skin. Then it would drop so suddenly that my breath froze in the air. Other workers were showing symptoms too. Pale skin, tremors, constant metallic taste in their mouths. The company nurse said it was seasonal fatigue and prescribed vitamins. But we all knew better. By Christmas, I tried to quit. I packed my things and booked a flight out. But when the time came, I physically couldn't leave. I found myself driving back to the plant instead, hands trembling on the steering wheel, drawn there by a pull I couldn't explain. The fish were calling to me, in soundless, rhythmic pulses that I felt in the back of my skull. And when I was near them, the pressure in my head eased. Away from them, it became unbearable. It hit me one night when I walked past the packaging line. The fish weren't being destroyed or studied. They were being shipped, labeled and sent out to grocery stores across the country under the Blue Ridge Fisheries brand. Contaminated product entering the food chain. When inspectors finally arrived, supposedly to investigate food poisoning reports, they found nothing unusual. They looked directly at the glowing fish and saw only normal cod and halibut. The contamination was invisible to anyone who hadn't handled them. Only those of us who'd touched them could see their true form. That was when I realized the infection wasn't biological. It was perceptual. The fish were altering the way we saw reality, tuning us to their frequency. We were being changed, molded into something that could help them spread. On my last night, the truth revealed itself. The phantom boats weren't catching anything. They were collecting. I saw it happen. A mass rising from the dark water beyond the docks, immense and formless, illuminated only by faint bioluminescent light. The ocean itself seemed to open, and from it came shapes that defied sense, fluid, glowing, moving in impossible ways. The crew stood motionless as the sea poured its offerings into their holds. Those weren't fish. They were pieces, fragments of something vast, something that lived miles beneath the surface. And we were its next evolution, its way of entering the world above. I left Kodiak the next morning, though part of me still isn't sure how. My body temperature hasn't stabilized since. One moment freezing, the next fever hot. I can still hear them when the world goes quiet. Soft tones like underwater songs echoing in my head. Every time I walk through a grocery store and pass the seafood aisle, I see flashes, scales that shimmer faintly, eyes too large, gills that twitch. The packaging says Pacific cod, but I know better. The contamination has spread far beyond Alaska now. Sometimes when I eat seafood, I taste metal on my tongue, and when the nights grow long and the sea freezes over again, I feel that same call, the one that dragged me back to the plant to return to the docks and help the harvest continue. Winter comes early in Kodiak, and every year new workers arrive, chasing high pay and long hours. They'll learn soon enough the ocean isn't empty. It's just waiting.